the strangest job interview I've ever had. Okay, so let me start by saying this. I did not expect to be writing this today, but here we are. I've had a lot of job interviews in my time, some good, some bad, and a few that were straight up weird. But none of them, I repeat, none of them were anything like the interview I had last week. So I had been job hunting for a while. I'd been working at my last place for a couple of years, and while it wasn't the worst job in the world, it was the boring kind of job where you clock in, do your thing, clock out, and nothing exciting ever happens. I wanted something different, something that would challenge me, and if I'm being honest, pay a bit more. I came across this posting for a position at a creative solutions firm, which, looking back, was the first red flag that promised to disrupt the industry with fresh ideas. Yeah, okay. I'm all about fresh ideas, and I thought the title of the position sounded pretty cool, so I figured why not throw my hat in the ring. Interview was set for 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in my best, I've got my life together outfit. The office was located in this trendy part of town that looked like it was designed to be an Instagram post, exposed brick walls, plants everywhere, the whole 9 yards. I was feeling pretty good about it all. Everything seemed like it was going according to plan. I walked into the lobby, and the receptionist told me to wait for a moment while they checked with the hearing manager. Then I was led into a glass-walled conference room. That's when I met him, the interviewer. He was dressed in a black turtleneck, glasses, and had this kind of I'm too cool for you vibe. His name was Greg, and I could tell immediately that he was probably the type of guy who says things like, I don't follow trends, I create them. Whatever, I'm not here to judge his style choices, so I gave him a friendly smile and shook his hand. He introduced himself in this super casual way, and we sat down. Everything seemed fine at first. A few basic questions like, tell me about yourself and why do you want this job? Normal stuff. I was feeling confident, giving my usual answers, thinking I was totally nailing it. But then the first question hit me like a ton of bricks. So, if you were a tree, which type would you be and why? I'm not kidding. I stared at him for a second, trying to figure out if he was joking or if I had accidentally walked into an improv comedy session. But nope, he was dead serious. I didn't even know how to begin to answer this. I mean, what was I supposed to say? I couldn't even remember the last time I thought about trees on a deep philosophical level. I did what anyone would do in that situation. I laughed nervously. I guess I'd be an oak tree because they're strong, steady, and reliable. Greg nodded thoughtfully, like he was analyzing me for some hidden depth. Interesting. Okay, let's move on. I tried to brush it off, but my mind was spinning. Was this what job interviews had become? But wait, it gets better. His next question was, if you had to choose between fighting one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses, which one would you fight? No, I'm not making this up. That's what he asked. I was so taken aback that I almost choked on my own spit. What kind of question is that? I asked, only half joking. Greg didn't skip a beat. It's important to see how you approach problem solving under pressure. If you had to face a big challenge, would you go for the more manageable one or try to tackle the bigger obstacle? I blinked a few times, trying to gather my thoughts. Okay, I guess I'd fight the 100 duck-sized horses. The idea of one giant duck sounds terrifying, but I could handle the smaller ones, right? He smiled and nodded like I had just solved the meaning of life. By this point, I was seriously questioning everything about this interview. But I wasn't about to bail now. I needed a job, and I figured I might as well see how far this went. The questions only got stranger from there. If you had to live in a world where you could only communicate by singing, how would you manage? Would you rather always have to walk backward or only be able to speak in rhymes? At this point, I was getting more and more frustrated. These were not the kinds of questions I had prepared for. I had researched the company, read up on the role, and practiced my answers for every possible question under the sun, except for these weird, bizarre hypotheticals. After an hour of these nonsensical questions, Greg finally leaned back in his chair and said, All right, I think we've gotten a good sense of who you are. We'll be in touch. I could barely hold back my sigh of relief. I nodded, trying to maintain composure. I thanked him and left, feeling more confused than ever. The next day, I got the email. It was a polite rejection, but it still stung. They said I wasn't the right fit for the role, which I guess is code for you're sane, and we don't want that here. After the weirdest interview of my life, I tried to put it behind me. I mean, it wasn't even worth stressing over, right? It was one of those things that was so bizarre I couldn't even be mad. Just confusion, mostly. Like I'd accidentally stumbled into a parallel universe where job interviews had turned into bizarre game shows. Oh, I brushed it off. A few days passed, and I started focusing on my next moves, finding another job. I updated my resume again, not that it made much of a difference, polished up my LinkedIn profile, and started applying to anything I could find that was remotely related to what I wanted to do. I didn't want to keep mopping about the whole tree and duck-sized horses situation, so I kept my head down and dove into the job hunt. Days passed in a blur of emails, interviews, and rejections. I was starting to get discouraged. Seriously, at this point I was beginning to wonder if I'd ever find something decent. You know that feeling when you've applied to dozens of jobs and haven't heard a single thing back? Yeah, that was me. It felt like a constant cycle of disappointment. But I kept pushing through, figuring something had to give eventually. Then, a week later, I was sitting at my desk in the middle of another exhausting job search session when I heard the ding of a new email. I glanced at my inbox, barely paying attention, figuring it would be just another generic thanks, but no thanks, rejection email. But this one had a different subject line. Follow-up interview request. I clicked it, my eyes quickly scanning the email. It would like to offer you a second interview. It appears there was some confusion with your application, and we apologize for the misunderstanding. We were impressed by your initial interview and believe you could be a great fit for the role. Please let us know your availability for a follow-up interview at your earliest convenience. Wait, what? I stared at the email in shock for a few moments. This had to be a mistake, right? I had definitely been rejected last week. There was no way they were reaching out to me after everything that had gone down. But the email didn't sound like a mistake. They seemed serious. My heart started to race. I mean, this was exactly what I wanted. If they were offering me another shot, that could mean I had a chance. Sure, it was the weirdest process ever, but who am I to turn down a second chance? The email also mentioned that they had confused me with another applicant. I don't even know how that's possible since I'm pretty sure no one else in the universe would have had a weirder experience with them than I did. But whatever, maybe this was my lucky break. I sat there for a few seconds, feeling a little more hopeful than I had in days. Maybe this time would go better. Maybe the second interview would be normal, or at least not involve any more horse-sized ducks or random philosophical tree questions. I replied, trying to keep my excitement in check, confirming a time for the interview. The whole time I was sitting there, a million questions raced through my head. What kind of company sends out a rejection letter and then reaches back out after a week? Was I the backup candidate they had forgotten about? Was this some kind of weird test, or were they just really bad at HR? I had no idea, but I was about to find out. Follow-up interview the day of the second interview came quickly. I was still a little confused, but I wasn't going to turn it down. I dressed a little more casually this time, hopping to avoid giving off the impression that I was some kind of over-prepared interview robot. I grabbed my coffee and tried to shake off the nerves. When I arrived, I was greeted by the same receptionist who had led me to the conference room the first time. She gave me a smile that seemed a little more forced than last time, but maybe I was just reading too much into it. I sat down, trying to calm my nerves and just wait. It wasn't long before I was led back into that same glass-walled room. And there he was, Greg. He was sitting at the table, the same casual posture, same air of I'm too cool for this. But this time, something felt a little different. He gave me a nod and motioned for me to sit down. Good to see you again. Thanks for coming in. He seemed oddly friendly. Too friendly, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. He didn't waste any time getting into the interview part. So, just to clarify things from last time, we believe we might have made an error with your application, and after reviewing everything, we're actually very interested in your background. I'm sorry for the confusion. I nodded, still not fully sure how I felt about the whole situation. No worries, I said, trying to stay composed. It's all good, I'm just happy to be here. Greg smiled. Good to hear. We've decided that we need to ask a few more questions to make sure we're on the same page, so let's jump right in, shall we? I braced myself for whatever weirdness was about to come my way, but this time, it was different. As I sat through the second interview, everything felt normal, like too normal. The questions were standard. What are my strengths, weaknesses, why did I leave my last job, where do I see myself in 5 years, all that usual corporate jazz. No tree-sized ducks, no bizarre metaphysical questions, just a straightforward conversation. If I didn't know better, I might have even said it was going well. I was relieved. This was a real interview, not some weird choose-your-own-adventure experience. We spoke about the company, the culture, and how I could potentially contribute. Everything felt like it was clicking into place. Greg seemed impressed with my answers, and I had started to feel optimistic. Maybe I could finally escape the endless cycle of bad interviews and rejections. Near the end, when Greg said, "All right, I think we're just about done here, but I want to go over a few things before we wrap up," I leaned forward, thinking this would be the usual, "we'll let you know in a week" line. I was ready for it. I had heard it so many times before, it was almost like second nature. But then Greg leaned back in his chair, looking more serious than he had during the rest of the interview. "So here's the thing," he started, his tone shifting. "We like you. We think you'd be a great fit here. You've got the skills, and we can see you being a valuable part of the team. The salary is competitive, and you'd be working with a pretty cool team. But there's one condition we have before we can make an official offer." I raised an eyebrow. "One condition." "Yeah," he said, his gaze locking onto mine. "It's a little unusual, but it's something we ask of everyone in the position. We require full transparency on your personal spending habits. You need to submit a daily report of all your expenses, every single purchase you make, no matter how small. You'd be asked to explain why you bought something, whether it's a cup of coffee or a new jacket. It's not something we like to mention up front, but it's crucial for how we operate. I blinked. I had heard of companies doing background checks or even monitoring employees' work devices. But this was something else. Full transparency of my daily spending habits. That was a level of intrusion I hadn't expected from a company. Wait, so you want me to send reports about literally everything I buy? I asked, trying to wrap my head around it. Greg nodded. Exactly. We don't just care about your work performance here. We want to understand your decision-making process as a whole. Why you spend money the way you do can give us a better picture of how you think, how you operate. It's a part of our corporate philosophy. If you're okay with that, we'd offer you the role with a 100% salary increase. 100% salary increase. Suddenly, that was a lot to process. A job that paid double what I was expecting, and all I had to do was track every penny I spent and justify it to the company. It sounded insane, but at the same time, the financial stability it promised was tempting. My mind raced. On one hand, I was desperate for a job, any job, and this seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime offer. But on the other hand, the idea of someone knowing everything I spent money on, from groceries to random impulse buys, felt invasive. Was that something I was willing to do? Was my privacy worth the salary boost? Greg must have noticed the hesitation in my eyes because he leaned in, his voice dropping to a more reassuring tone. I get it, it's not for everyone, but think about it, double the pay. You could pay off debts faster, save for whatever you've been putting off, and have a comfortable lifestyle. Plus, you'd be working with an incredibly innovative team. It's worth considering, right? I wanted to say yes. I really did. The money was tempting, and I couldn't deny how much easier my life would be if I had that kind of income. But the thought of tracking every single thing I bought, explaining my purchases to my boss, it was a huge ask. And for some reason, the more I thought about it, the less I liked the idea. But what if this was my one chance to break into the kind of career I had been dreaming about? What if I said no and regretted it for the rest of my life? What if I said yes, and it wasn't as bad as I thought? I looked Greg in the eyes, trying to make up my mind. The silence in the room felt suffocating. Finally, I spoke. I'm not sure, Greg. I'm going to need some time to think about it. He smiled, clearly not bothered by my hesitation. Take all the time you need, but just know this is a rare offer. You won't find another one like it. As I walked out of the office, I felt a mix of excitement and unease. The offer was tempting, but the cost, both literal and figurative, was a lot to swallow. I was so close to something amazing, but was I willing to give up my privacy for it? I had no idea. The next few days, I couldn't shake off what Greg had said to me. That offer was hanging over my head like a cloud, making it hard to concentrate on anything else. I would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, imagining what my life would look like with double the salary. The possibilities were endless. I could finally pay off my debts, stop living paycheck to paycheck, and even splurge on things I had been putting off for years. But the price? My privacy. Every little thing I bought would be scrutinized, analyzed, and questioned. It felt like a bargain with the devil. I started Googling. I had to know, was this some weird corporate cult that demanded this level of control over its employees? Surely, I couldn't be the only person to be offered this kind of deal, right? No matter how many different search terms I entered, I found nothing. There were no blog posts, no Reddit threads, no reviews about companies requiring full spending transparency in exchange for a higher salary. Maybe it was a new trend, or maybe Greg was right. It was a rare offer. I even checked the company's website for anything about it. The only thing I could find was a vague section on corporate values and commitment to transparency. It didn't mention anything about the spending reports. I scrolled through a few more pages, hoping for a hidden forum where someone had spilled the beans, but no luck. The search was driving me crazy. No matter what I did, I couldn't find any definitive answer. Was I just paranoid? Was I overthinking this? Maybe it was all normal and I was the one who was being unreasonable. But then reality hit me. Money was tight. I had no job. My savings were running low, and every day I spent without income made the pressure unbearable. The thought of living paycheck to paycheck for even one more month was horrifying. But was I willing to sacrifice my freedom for a paycheck? One morning, I woke up and checked my phone. I had a message from Greg. Hey, just wanted to follow up with you. Let me know if you've made a decision. We'd love to have you on the team, but I totally understand if the offer isn't the right fit. Either way, we'll support your decision. The pressure was building. My bank account was shrinking. I was desperate, but I couldn't bring myself to make the deal. I didn't want to play with my privacy like that. I spent the entire day thinking about it, weighing my options. Finally, after hours of internal struggle, I decided to do it. I called Greg back and left a voicemail. Hey Greg, I've been thinking a lot about the offer. And while I really appreciate the opportunity, I've decided it's not the right fit for me. I just don't feel comfortable with the condition regarding the spending reports. I hope you understand. I left it at that. I figured that was it. No more awkward discussions, no more feeling like I was constantly being watched. For the next week, I was back to square one. I kept scouring job boards, sending out applications like a madman. I needed something stable, something that wouldn't compromise my personal life. And then, finally, it happened. A company reached out to me. The interview was normal, nothing weird, and they offered me a position within a few days. It wasn't the high-paying dream job I had hoped for, but it was a job. I'd be working in a similar field with a good team, and the pay wasn't terrible. Not double my last salary, but it was enough to live comfortably with room for growth. I should have been happy, and in many ways I was. But as I walked out of that office on my first day, the nagging thought crept back into my mind. Did I make the right choice? The salary might have been less, but the peace of mind, the freedom, that was worth something. Still, I couldn't help but think about the what-ifs. What if I had taken the higher-paying job? What if I had agreed to the transparency condition and just lived with it? Was I being too rigid, too cautious? A part of me felt like I had passed up an opportunity. Another part was relieved. And I guess, in the end, it's all just a matter of balance. The money would come, it always does. But my privacy, that was worth more than any paycheck.